It happened at the rehearsal dinner. I was standing by the mirror in my ivory wedding gown when Violet accidentally tripped and spilled a full glass of red wine across the bodice. The silk bloomed crimson, like a wound reopening. I gasped, frozen in place as the cold liquid soaked through to my skin. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're a widow, Clara, not a woman. Stop trying to be one." The room went silent. My hands trembled as I stared at the spreading stain. Walter's daughter had just marked me like territory, claiming what she thought belonged to her. The rehearsal was supposed to be intimate, just close family at the country club. I had chosen this dress carefully, spending weeks finding the right shade of ivory that didn't wash out my complexion. At 62, I knew what colors worked. I didn't know it then, but that stain wasn't the only thing she planned to destroy. Something inside me shifted in that moment, something I thought had died with Raymond 10 years ago. A spark of defiance I'd forgotten I possessed. The guests fell quiet, unsure whether to gasp or laugh nervously. Walter rushed to me, apologizing profusely for his daughter's clumsiness. Violet smiled sweetly at everyone, playing the innocent role perfectly. She even offered me napkins, her eyes dancing with satisfaction behind her concern. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I excused myself with a polite smile, pretending composure, while my insides churned with humiliation. In the bathroom, I scrubbed at the stain until my fingers ached and the skin on my hands turned red. The wine had settled deep into the fabric, just like Violet's words had settled into my heart. I stared at myself in the mirror, at the ruined dress, and my trembling hands. I had spent 10 years mourning a husband, learning to be alone, finding peace in my widow's life. Raymond and I had 30 good years together before cancer took him. I'd learned to cook for one, to sleep in an empty bed, to stop setting two places at the table. But that night, something else was reborn inside me, something fierce and unwilling to be dismissed or diminished by anyone. After that night, Violet avoided me, but not her subtle insults. Every morning she would drop small comments over breakfast. "That color's too young for you, Clara." Or, "Walter deserves someone simpler, don't you think?" She said these things with a smile, like she was helping me understand my place. Walter told me she was just adjusting to the change of having someone new in his life. I told myself to be patient, to give her time to accept that her father had found happiness again. But patience is what made people like her think they could spit in your face and call it an accident. I started noticing other things too. How she would touch Walter's arm possessively when I entered a room. How she would reference Mom constantly, as if summoning a ghost to push me out. Mom loved this china pattern, or Mom always said Dad looked best in blue. Every mention was a knife, carefully placed. I promised myself then, watching her smirk over her coffee cup, she would never make me feel small again. The wedding day arrived with clear blue skies and perfect weather. The ceremony was beautiful, at least for everyone else watching from the white chairs we'd arranged in Walter's garden. I smiled through the vows, my voice steady as I promised to love Walter for the rest of our days. Even when Violet walked down the aisle holding her father's arm like she was the bride, I kept smiling. She wore white too, despite my gentle suggestion that perhaps a pastel would be lovely. My dress had been professionally cleaned at an expensive shop downtown, but the faint pink shadow of the wine stain remained visible in certain light. The cleaner apologized, saying red wine and silk were natural enemies. I kept it there on purpose after he offered to try a harsher chemical treatment. A reminder of what she had done. A mark of warning that I was no longer the soft woman who would accept humiliation quietly. The ceremony was short, the reception shorter. And she would learn soon enough that I never forget a single slight against me, no matter how sweetly she smiled afterward. When we returned from our honeymoon in the mountains, the house felt different. Colder somehow, despite the summer heat that made the air shimmer above the driveway. Walter's laughter faded when he saw his daughter waiting in the living room with 3 large suitcases and several boxes. "I've decided to stay here for a while," Violet announced, not asking, just telling us her plans. Dad shouldn't be alone with new people. She didn't even look at me when she said it. I was new people. an outsider in what she considered her father's house, even though Walter and I were married now. I smiled politely at Walter, squeezed his hand, and said nothing about the tightness in my chest. My fingers gripped my suitcase handle until my knuckles turned white. The guest had just made herself the host, and I was the one being tolerated in my own marriage. Walter looked uncomfortable, but didn't contradict her. "Just for a little while," he said quietly to me, "until she finds a new place." But I could see in Violet's eyes she had no intention of leaving anytime soon. She began moving things within the first week of her stay. My clothes mysteriously ended up mistakenly folded into guest room drawers instead of the master bedroom. My perfume bottle disappeared from the master bathroom vanity, replaced with her mother's old bottle of white shoulders. The house started to smell like the past, like a museum dedicated to a dead woman I'd never met. One night, I found Violet sitting on my side of the bed, staring at my jewelry box with her fingers trailing over the pearl necklace Walter had given me for our engagement. She looked up slowly when she heard me in the doorway and said, "My mother wore pearls too." But she didn't pretend to be young while wearing them. The comment hung in the air like poison gas. I realized then she wasn't just cruel or grieving her mother after all these years. She was territorial, marking her space like an animal, and I was the intruder she planned to drive out. Every day brought a new small violation. My favorite chair suddenly had her sweater on it. My coffee mug was in the back of the cabinet. My place at the table shifted slightly away from Walter. I tried to tell Walter what was happening, sitting him down after dinner one evening. But he only sighed tiredly, rubbing his temples the way he did when his blood pressure was acting up. "She's grieving her mother," he said, like that explained everything. "Please be patient with her, Clara. This is hard for her." Grieving? Her mother had been gone for 15 years, dead from breast cancer, when Violet was 30. What Violet was mourning wasn't her mother at all. It was control over her father, over his money, over his life and decisions. And Walter, sweet blind Walter, was too kind to see the manipulation happening right in front of him. He saw a daughter struggling with change. I saw a woman waging a quiet war for dominance. So I stopped trying to make him see what he refused to look at. Instead, I started making plans of my own, plans that required patience and careful observation. I began documenting things. Small things at first. Noting when items moved. When comments were made. Building a case in my mind. One afternoon while Violet was out shopping, I cleaned her room as a peace offering. That's when I found the envelope tucked behind a drawer that hadn't been pushed in all the way. Inside were financial documents, copies of her father's investment portfolios, retirement plans, and property deeds. I recognized some of the accounts Walter had mentioned casually during our engagement when we discussed our financial futures. But one document made my blood run cold and my hands shake. It was a beneficiary form for Walter's life insurance policy, the big one worth nearly $500,000. My name had been typed in as primary beneficiary, then physically crossed out with thick black marker. Above it, in Violet's careful handwriting, was her own name written clearly. She wasn't just jealous of me replacing her mother in Walter's heart. She was systematically working to erase me from Walter's financial future, one document at a time. I photographed everything with trembling hands, making sure to get clear images before carefully replacing the envelope exactly where I'd found it. I invited Violet to dinner that night, pretending I wanted to build bridges between us and start fresh. I made her favorite meal, roast chicken with lemon glaze and roasted vegetables, just as Walter had described it to me months ago. As we ate, I mentioned Walter's investment accounts casually, watching her face carefully over the rim of my wine glass. "Funny thing," I said, keeping my voice light and conversational. "The bank called today about some irregular withdrawals from the retirement account." I watched her hand freeze, with the wine glass halfway to her lips. She choked slightly, coughing into her napkin while her face flushed red. "Really?" she managed to say after catching her breath. "What did they say about it?" I smiled gently, cutting my chicken. "Oh, just routine verification. Nothing important." The bank hadn't actually called at all, but her eyes gave me the confirmation I desperately needed. The way they widened, the way she couldn't quite meet my gaze afterward. She knew exactly what withdrawals I was talking about. She was guilty, and now I knew for certain. The next morning, I visited the bank myself while Walter was at his regular doctor's appointment for his blood pressure. The manager, a pleasant woman named Helen who'd helped us open our joint account, showed me the account Walter and I had established after our marriage. Except it wasn't joint anymore. Violet had filed updated beneficiary forms 2 weeks after our wedding, while we were still on our honeymoon. My name had been removed entirely and replaced with hers as the primary beneficiary on everything. Helen showed me the signature line, pointing with her pen. Mr. Benson signed these himself, she explained, assuming everything was normal. I stared at Walter's signature, something nagging at my memory. The loops were too perfect, too careful, and controlled. Walter's actual signature was Messier, rushed, with a distinctive shake in the W from his arthritis. I had seen him sign our marriage certificate, seen him sign birthday cards and letters to old friends. This wasn't quite right. The proportions were correct but lifeless. I had seen that careful, traced handwriting before, but not on any bank form. It was on Violet's grocery lists, her careful, methodical printing. I took a photo of the signature with my phone and hurried home, my heart racing. In Walter's home office, I pulled out old documents from file cabinets, spreading them across his desk. Tax returns from last year, mortgage papers from the house refinance, birthday cards he'd written to Violet over the years. I compared them all to the photo on my phone, holding each one up to the screen. My suspicions solidified into certainty with each comparison. The signature on the bank form was traced, probably over a light box or window with the sun behind it. Violet had forged her own father's signature to steal my place in his accounts and his will. My stomach dropped with the realization, then quickly hardened into something like steel. She thought she was untouchable, protected by Walter's love and his unwillingness to believe his daughter capable of such calculated betrayal. She thought I was just a lonely widow who'd be grateful for whatever scraps of acceptance she threw my way. But love can't protect you when the person you've underestimated is done playing nice and starts playing smart instead. The next morning, I made tea for both of us in the kitchen, using the good china. I stirred sugar into her cup slowly, watching her sip it while reading something on her phone, probably texting friends. "You must be so busy lately," I said pleasantly, arranging cookies on a plate. "So many papers to sign, so many forms to fill out. It must be exhausting keeping track of everything." She froze with the cup against her lips, her eyes flicking up to meet mine. "I don't know what you mean," she replied carefully, setting down her phone on the counter. Her voice was controlled, but I saw her jaw tighten and her hand shake slightly. I smiled, sweet as honey, taking a sip of my own tea. "Oh, I'm sure you do, dear. The bank has very good records, you know. They keep copies of everything. Every signature, every form, every transaction." Her face paled slightly, the color draining from her cheeks. "You will understand everything very soon." Her eyes flickered with something I hadn't seen before in all our interactions. Fear. Real, genuine fear of consequences. And I have to admit, after months of her subtle cruelty, I savored every second of watching her realize she'd been caught. I contacted Walter's longtime accountant, a quiet man named Henry who had managed his finances for 20 years, since before his wife died. Henry had always been kind to me, complimenting my patience with Walter's complicated family situation and my gentle way with him. When I showed him copies of the documents I'd found and photographed, his jaw clenched visibly and his normally calm face went dark with anger. "She's been siphoning funds for months," he said, pulling up account records on his computer screen and showing me transaction after transaction. Small amounts at first, a few hundred here and there, then larger withdrawals. "You have no idea how much she's actually taken." He showed me transfers I hadn't known existed. Thousands of dollars moved to accounts in Violet's name, supposedly for household expenses and family emergencies that never happened. The total was nearly $80,000. I looked at the numbers scrolling across the screen, feeling strangely calm despite the betrayal. "Then let's make her give it back. I said quietly, my voice steady and cold. The widow was learning to play the game, and she was learning fast. Henry nodded grimly. I'll prepare a full audit. We hosted a small family dinner that weekend at Walter's request. Nothing fancy. I invited 2 of his close friends, both successful lawyers who had known him for decades and had helped him through his wife's death years ago. Violet arrived wearing a red dress, the same color as the wine she'd spilled, dripping with confidence and expensive perfume I knew she'd bought with stolen money. She kissed her father's cheek warmly and ignored me completely, brushing past like I was furniture. Over dinner, during the main course, I made sure to accidentally bring up the topic of joint accounts and estate planning. Walter's so trusting, I said softly, touching his hand affectionately. He'd sign anything if he thought it would make Violet happy, wouldn't you, darling? Walter chuckled, oblivious to the undercurrent. I suppose I would. The table went quiet. Both lawyers looked at me with sudden interest, their expressions shifting. Violet's fork stopped moving halfway to her mouth, suspended in air. What do you mean by that? She asked, her voice tight and controlled. I just smiled sweetly. Nothing important, dear. Just that your father trusts you completely. After dinner, one of the lawyers, Marcus, pulled me aside in the hallway while the others had coffee in the living room. You mentioned signing forms earlier, he said quietly, glancing toward the living room where Violet was talking to her father and laughing too loudly. Does Walter know she's been accessing his accounts? That sounded like more than casual conversation. I looked him straight in the eye and made my decision in that moment. Not yet, I said clearly, keeping my voice low. But he's about to learn everything very soon. I have documentation. Marcus nodded slowly, understanding crossing his face and his expression hardening. If you need legal help, Violet appeared in the doorway behind him suddenly, and from her expression, the way her eyes widened and her face went pale, I knew she'd overheard at least part of our conversation. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked genuinely nervous, vulnerable even. I had finally found her weakness. Not money, not control over her father. Exposure. Public exposure of what she'd done to everyone who knew and respected Walter. 3 days later, Walter collapsed in the garden while trimming his prized roses. A mild heart attack, the doctor said after running tests. I rushed to the hospital, my heart in my throat, terrified of losing him so soon after finding love again. But when I arrived at his room in the cardiac unit, Violet was already there, sitting by his bedside with tears streaming down her face dramatically. I'll take care of everything, Dad, she was whispering, stroking his hand while he lay there pale and weak. Don't worry about anything. I'll handle all the accounts, all the paperwork, everything. She glanced at me as I entered, and her expression shifted to something almost triumphant despite her tears. Like I was the intruder again, disrupting their private moment of father-daughter intimacy. I said nothing, just sat in the corner chair, watching and listening carefully. But my mind was racing with terrible thoughts. If Walter didn't wake soon, if something happened to him now while he was vulnerable, she would have full control of everything. All the accounts she'd already accessed, all the money she'd already stolen, all the forged documents. She would inherit everything, and I would have nothing. I met with Henry and Marcus the next morning in a coffee shop near the hospital, bringing all my documentation. Together, we filed an emergency freeze on all major accounts pending verification of signatures and investigation of unauthorized transfers. It took 3 hours of paperwork and phone calls. Marcus promised me, looking serious, if she tries to access anything or forge any more documents, it'll flag instantly, and we'll know immediately. The bank will contact us. That evening, Violet came storming into the hospital waiting room where I sat reading. Her face was flushed with rage, her hands balled into fists. What did you do? She hissed, grabbing my arm hard enough to bruise. The bank called me. They've frozen everything. I can't access Dad's accounts. Other visitors looked over at us. I pulled my arm free calmly, standing to meet her eyes. I protected my husband, I said simply, keeping my voice steady. From thieves. Her mask cracked completely then, the sweet daughter act shattering. You have no right, she snarled, her voice rising. This is family money. You're not family. And the real Violet, ugly and desperate and vicious, finally surfaced for everyone in that waiting room to see clearly. She followed me to the parking garage, her heels clicking angrily on the concrete, echoing in the empty space. You think you're clever? She spat, cornering me by my car in the dim fluorescent lighting. You're just an old woman pretending to matter. You'll always be second to my mother. Always. Her voice echoed off the walls. I stood up straighter, meeting her furious eyes without flinching or backing away. Then stop acting so afraid of me, I said quietly, my voice calm and steady. She froze, fists trembling at her sides, caught off guard. Something in my tone must have unsettled her deeply. I'm not afraid of you, she insisted, but her voice wavered and cracked. Yes, you are, I replied, taking a step toward her instead of away. Because you know I've figured everything out. The forged signatures. The stolen money. All of it. She tried to say something else, her mouth opening and closing, but nothing came out. Her confidence had evaporated. She didn't know it standing there in that garage, breathing hard, but the end of her little empire had already begun. The freeze was just the start. When Walter regained full consciousness 2 days later, he was confused but lucid, asking for water. The doctors said he'd make a complete recovery with proper care and medication. I sat beside his bed, holding his hand gently, waiting until he was fully alert. I told him everything as calmly as I could, keeping my voice gentle. The forged signatures I'd found. The transfers Henry had discovered. The systematic theft over months. He didn't want to believe it at first, shaking his head weakly. No, not Violet, he kept saying, his voice hoarse. There must be some mistake. She wouldn't do that to me. But when Henry arrived with folders full of evidence, bank statements with highlighted transactions, and copies of the forged signatures compared to his real ones, Walter's face went completely pale. His hands shook as he held the papers. She did this? He whispered, staring at the documents with tears in his eyes. To me? Her own father? I nodded, squeezing his hand. He was silent for a long moment, staring at the ceiling. Then he asked to see her. And I made absolutely sure he did, calling her immediately. When Violet entered the hospital room the next day, Walter's expression was unreadable, his face like stone. I stood in the corner, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold. You used my name to steal from me, he said quietly, his voice weak but clear and cutting. You forged my signature on bank documents. She tried to cry, to explain, her words tumbling over each other desperately. Dad, I was just protecting our family assets from her.
She's not really family.
She's just some woman who trapped you. She's just... Walter raised his hand, cutting her off with a gesture. You humiliated Clara at our rehearsal dinner. You made her feel unwelcome in her own home. You betrayed my trust completely. His voice grew stronger with each sentence. You stole from me. Get out of my room. Get out of my house. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the beeping of monitors. Violet's mouth opened and closed like a fish, but no sound came out. Tears ran down her face, real ones this time. For the first time in her life, she had nowhere left to hide from the truth of what she'd done. 2 days after Walter came home from the hospital, moving slowly but steadily, police arrived at the house in the morning. Forgery and financial fraud. Both serious crimes carrying significant penalties. I had given Marcus permission to file the criminal report, and Walter hadn't stopped it despite his grief. He sat in his favorite chair by the window, looking older and sadder than I'd ever seen him, watching his daughter be arrested. I stood by the window as officers led Violet away in handcuffs, reading her rights. She was still wearing a red dress, bright against the flashing blue and red lights of the police car in our driveway. Neighbors came out to watch. She glared at me over her shoulder as they put her in the back seat, her eyes burning with pure hatred and disbelief. The same red color she'd spilled on my wedding dress months ago at the rehearsal. The color of wine and blood and shame and anger. Now it was the color of her downfall, of justice finally served. Walter wept quietly as they drove her away. I held his hand. Weeks passed quietly after that terrible day. Walter recovered slowly, taking careful walks in the garden each morning and reading by the fireplace in the evenings. The house began to feel like a real home for the first time since I'd moved in. The smell of White Shoulder's perfume finally faded completely, replaced by the lavender sachets I hung in the closets and the scent of fresh flowers I kept in every room. I began to sleep peacefully for the first time in months, without listening for footsteps in the hallway or checking if doors were locked. Walter and I fell into comfortable routines. Morning coffee together, evening walks, simple pleasures. But peace has a strange sound in my experience. It's almost too quiet sometimes, like the calm before a storm approaches. After so many years of loss and struggle, I should have known better than to trust it completely. Until the letter arrived one Tuesday morning, slipped through our mail slot with no return address and no postage. Just my name written on the envelope in familiar handwriting. It was from Violet, written from wherever she was staying after making bail, with money borrowed from friends. There was no apology, no remorse, just venom dripping from every word scrawled across the page. "You stole him from me," she had written in angry, jagged handwriting. "You think you've won, but blood always finds a way back. He'll always be my father first. You're just a replacement, a cheap copy of my mother." I read it twice, feeling my hands shake with anger, then folded the letter carefully. I carried it to the kitchen sink and held a match to the corner, watching the paper curl and blacken, the edges glowing orange. "No," I whispered as the flames consumed her poisonous words. "Blood may remember, but it doesn't rule anything anymore." The ashes fell into the sink in soft gray flakes. I washed them down the drain with cold water, watching them disappear. Some ghosts deserve to stay dead and buried where they belong, not haunting the living. I never told Walter about the letter. Months later, on a warm autumn afternoon when the leaves were turning gold, Walter surprised me with a wrapped gift box tied with ivory ribbon. Inside was a new wedding dress, simple and elegant, made of silk that caught the afternoon light beautifully. There wasn't a single stain or shadow anywhere on the perfect fabric. "For our vow renewal," he said softly, watching my face carefully for my reaction. "I want to do it right this time. Just us, the way it should have been." I smiled, running my fingers over the perfect material, feeling tears prick my eyes. "It's beautiful," I whispered, overcome with emotion. We renewed our vows the following week in the garden with just Henry and Marcus as witnesses, the ceremony simple and heartfelt. I wore the new dress. Walter wore his best suit. The sun was warm, the flowers were blooming, and for the first time, no one dared to spill anything. No one interrupted with snide comments. No one tried to take what wasn't theirs. It was absolutely perfect, the wedding I deserved all along. People say forgiveness is strength, that moving on means letting go completely of past hurts. Maybe that's true for some people with bigger hearts than mine. But sometimes, real strength is just surviving long enough to see your enemy destroy themselves with their own choices and cruelty. I still keep the old stained wedding gown in a box at the back of my closet, wrapped in tissue paper. Not as a memory of humiliation or something to mourn over on bad days, but as proof of where I started. Proof that no matter how hard someone tries to erase you, to mark you as less than, to steal your place in the world and diminish your worth, you can always rewrite the ending of your own story. Violet learned too late that the widow she tried to dismiss was stronger than any woman she'd ever known. She learned that quiet people aren't weak, just patient. And that's a lesson she'll carry with her forever, through whatever comes next in her life. I won, not through cruelty, but through simply refusing to disappear.